Welcome to the 775 Alive podcast, your rural Nevada headquarters for decoding politics, economics, and general global shenanigans. I'm Crystal Newton, your business strategist, breaking down why Nevada's hustle is stronger than a sagebrush root in a windstorm. Here with my trusty co-host, Scott Gaborski, PhD historian, here to explain the smart lessons of history, even if we are likely to ignore them. Grab your boots for a wild ride through today's most important news.
Okay, welcome back to 775 Alive. We got a really special guest today with everything that's going on, and that is Shawn Holster, who's the chair emeritus of the Minneapolis GOP. So thanks for joining us, Shawn.
Thank you for having me. Very much a pleasure to be here.
Are you staying safe? Are you broadcasting from a bunker? How is it for Republicans in Minnesota right now?
The most important thing right now is staying warm. At least we're in single digits, so that's good. Republicans in Minneapolis always are somewhat bunker bound and kind of keep our heads low if we want to not get messed with at the donut shop. But no, things are just fine. Actually, yeah. It's more quiet than one would be led to believe.
Scott and I are from Nevada, and there's nothing but Minneapolis coverage on media everywhere. And I think most of us in the country are getting a little tired of getting filtered information. So Scott and I wanted to go directly to a Republican in Minneapolis that knows it. You've been involved in politics. You understand the backstory. So we're really hoping you can help us understand what's going on, especially today with the Senate hearings, or is it Senate or House hearings where they're talking about Minneapolis ICE raids. Can you help us understand what's going on, a little bit of the backstory, or like how are things going for Republicans? I know you were telling me you just installed security cameras and are starting to get armed so you can be safe.
Well, we're not armed. I mean, no more than is legally allowed for any citizen in Minneapolis. No, things are generally going on as usual, but we are heightening security. We have caucuses coming up. That is our primary focus right now as a city organization. It is our legal and constitutional duties to make sure caucuses go off, and we have 137 of them. So, no, this is the first time we've ever organized caucus before and had to take this level of security in mind. I think that can be said across the city bipartisanly. The climate emotionally heightened. Emotions are definitely heightened around here. The thing that I would like the world to know that in all this tension, everything else, and people have a hard time hearing this, is that 95% of the city, if you did not have a television or a radio or you were on your phone all day, you really wouldn't notice much of a disruption. It's a big city. These protests, these incidences, they're in fairly isolated areas, even the larger ones. I mean, it's horrible to say, oh, you closed down downtown. Well, it was a Friday or a Saturday, and there's no business downtown anymore anyway. Mm-hmm. You drove that out. There's no real commercial disruption. It's a lot of theater for the cameras, quite bluntly.
And just to get some background, because we were talking about this, and this is something that I think a lot of political junkies are talking about. Even though Minneapolis is a big city, it's one of twin cities. So you have St. Paul right across the river, right? And these two, even though they're in this proximity and share sports teams, but more importantly, they don't really. It's sort of fun to watch how their policies tend to split over the years. Are you seeing some of this problem that's going on in Minneapolis also happening over in St. Paul, or is that a totally different dynamic over there?
It's a totally different dynamic. You do not have the protest culture and the political theater culture on the street that you do in Minneapolis, and St. Paul just simply doesn't have that. You're not seeing the more festival-like gatherings, the large collection of signs. You're not seeing the disruption to ICE operations. You are not seeing the arrests that we are now starting to see that happened in Minneapolis last night, now that Tom Homan's in town, that happened in Maple Grove night before last. I don't know if it's a matter of there's not as much of a tolerance in Ramsey County as there is in Hennepin County. I mean, they're two cities and they're two separate counties as well, along the river. That Yeah, I don't know. Minneapolis tends to be more inclined to political theater and circus. And always has been. You had the Midway burning to the same degree in St. Paul during the George Floyd riots that we had on Lake Street, but the mass, the acreage of those was considerably higher in Minneapolis, again in South Minneapolis. Your abolish the police protests, the May Day parade. There is politics is much more of a hobby and part of the culture in Minneapolis in general, and activism for the sake of activism. And I think a lot of it has to do with is we have a much larger, more ingrained DSA, Democratic Socialists of America presence on the U of M campus and in the activist community in Minneapolis as opposed to St. Paul.
Well, I think a lot of Republicans are watching some of these images, and you're right. A lot of it is the production of theatrics, but you do catch some things that are truly terrible to watch, and it's a shame that they're using as theatrics. But a lot of Republicans are telling themselves, "Look, it's not helping. It's not happening in other states, so it's likely that the conflicts are coming from inside, and they're trying to be produced." But the one question that remains for me is why Minneapolis? And we're touching on that a little bit. Yeah, they have a little more culture of theatrics, but why is Minneapolis kind of the spotlight right now? Why isn't it going on in other cities? Where does this come from?
Because our activists, our hard progressive activists, end up getting elected to political office, to city council, to the state senate, to the state House of Representatives, to governor, to county attorney, you name it, school boards. Our activists are our office holders in to a scale that I don't think is true anywhere else. And as well, and I noticed this when you started seeing signs that you can't be illegal on stolen land, right?
Mm.
I think you also have a unique nexus of what's known politically as the Red-Green Alliance, communist, socialist, and Islamist, because CARE, Council of American Islamic Relations, Minnesota, it has a great influence here. And you're seeing their signage, you're seeing their leader, their director at these protests, very, very forward facing, very, very active in this. And again, they're not just the activists, they end up being the office holders.
Mm-hmm.
And do you
Well,
think that
And can mobilize their volunteer base, their donor base.
do you think this push in Minneapolis is in part fueled by trying to cover up the fraud?
Absolutely.
mm-hmm.
Okay.
Absolutely. Distraction. And
Seems like a tantrum to me.
it is. And because I think it's significant that 14 of the programs, Medicaid programs that are under scrutiny are human services, health and human services, Department of Human Services that deal with housing, with mental health treatment, with addiction treatment, with elder care, with adult care. And that is a market sector more and more and more importantly every day in Minneapolis, in Minnesota. It was, I forget what year it was. It was definitely during the presidential campaign. Kevin Leary, is that his name, from Shark Tank?
Mm-hmm. Mr. Wonderful?
Yeah, he was pointing out that the only growth industry in Minnesota is healthcare and social services.
Right.
And
And
that's not a secret either. And so yes, the job market is nervous that okay, there's going to be a lot of unemployment in the very near future if this fraud is actually prosecuted to the degree that is looking like it should be.
right. Well, and this gets back to the something that's been going on is that, in some ways the increased use of nonprofits is a privatization of government services on the political left. And what we're seeing now is the same sort of reaction we saw to the privatization of government services and private corporations on the right that starts in the late 70s, right? And then by the time we get into the 80s, 90s, there's all these efforts to address the perceived corruption. I think that's part of the dynamic. But there is something else that's vitally important, I think, in this and talking about why this is Minneapolis. And it's the reason for the ICE operations. I mean, the ICE operations isn't about arresting people accused of fraud. It's illegal immigrants in the presence of that Somali community up there that seems to be at the center of a lot of this fraud. right? Something like 90% of the people who have already been indicted are coming out of this Somali community, which is heavily concentrated in Minneapolis. What's your experience on working with them up there? And then I've got to sort of follow up on that as well, because I think it's interesting.
In the political or social services aspect.
Well, I actually think it's important in both. So whichever way you want to go.
I think it's important to point out that okay, when you're looking at the fraud and the participation level by Somali providers specifically, you're looking at third-party vendors, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there was at one point in my life where I was a caseworker, so this is somewhat in my wheelhouse. Is you have these third party providers, whether they be medically assisted treatment or transportation. We've heard a lot about transportation, arms workers, which is adult mental health rehabilitative services, and adult home health care, right? These are third party providers that, okay, a county organization, or be it housing, be it disability, be it addiction, contracts with these third-party vendors to give medical transport from wherever they're staying to a doctor's appointment, or to get approval for medically assisted treatment through a clinic that is contracted with a facility. And housing is the big one where, okay, you'll have this third-party provider come in and bill for services at 15-minute increments, right? Until the totality of the $3,000 grant that recipient received because of disability or through whatever other funding mechanism received to find immediate transitional housing, that gets tapered away, and boom, and then the client's out of luck, the provider, good luck really kind of digging into it, because that falls into HIPAA violations or protections and whatnot, because it's healthcare. For insurance purposes, for data practice purposes, everything else. And those third-party providers, those services are easily exploitable, apparently, right? As we are now seeing, billing for services not provided.
And they're hard to verify because
No fail safes. The auditing process, as we're now seeing, Health and Human Services workers from the state of Minnesota, whistleblowers coming out left and right. These whistleblowers have been coming out for 5 years. And it's part of why I stepped out of that field, is doing billing and whatnot, and just shaking my head. This is, and it's so vague, it's so nebulous and ever changing, because a lot of it can also fall into regulatory compliance with, okay, this is how you're being told to do this year or this legislative session, or until this the joke was, okay, don't worry about figuring it out with all of this, because as soon as you do, they're going to change the rules. Mm-hmm. When we were working on, with a client caseload as a team in some instances, and that's where one community seems to have been able to exploit it at a greater percentage than others. But if that system hadn't been in place and put together in a regulatory structure, an lack of oversight structure, and a legislative structure to set this system up, the exploitation would not have happened. So it's not, well, did you see what she was wearing excuse? But if I were a criminal, that's how I'd do it. And it's not even criminal at that point. It's playing the shell game of regulatory compliance and proper chain of custody of billing cycles. Paper.
And can I just add that your attorney general has declined to look into this for the past 3 years?
Funny that.
So it's a whole team effort there.
Has no problem telling Kia that they need to make safer ignition systems so people don't steal their cars so much.
Right. Yeah, no, and this is an interesting issue. Is that one of the things we're seeing is a whole set of overlapping sort of circumstances, overlapping institutions, which is not unusual. I mean, going back to the George Floyd, there are problems in how, for instance, the police unions have protected police officers who probably should have been dismissed and disciplined much earlier. But there's also problems with judges who allow violent criminals back out on the streets. There's problems with dealing with these mental issues. So, the fact that these are stacking, I don't find necessarily surprising. But I do find surprising why it's one particular community that seems to be able to to address this, at least at this case. Now we might find others, right? And I'll add in that, as we were discussing when we were prepping for this, living in Atlanta all those years, very much like Minneapolis, we had a huge Somali immigrant community that comes in at the same time, right? So this would have been the 1990s, right? When Somalia starts coming about. And my experience with working with that community and being at political events in them is that they're operating totally different than what we see in Minneapolis. I mean, I didn't see this effort to basically self-isolate, first of all. I mean, certainly they had their community organizations, but it wasn't like they were the Somali community. They're showing up at town halls when congressmen still did, asking, why aren't we fixing the sidewalks? Why aren't we fixing the schools? Just like their neighbors who are non-Somalis were doing. Is this something that's the Somali community in Minneapolis particularly that has gone off the rails? Is there some sort of synergy somewhere that we're missing nationally in looking at this?
I don't think it is specifically local. And again, I'll predicate what I'm about to say with, I don't even think that this part is so much illegal or unlawful, is that when I ran for state senate 4 years ago, I started looking into the campaign finance reports of my opponent, who was Somali, right? And something that jumped off the page there for me was campaign contributions coming out of specifically the Columbus, Ohio area. And what other Somali community are you hearing a lot about right about now is Columbus, Ohio. And then you start looking into the Columbus, Ohio area and political contributions, campaign finance reports, and Maine starts popping up more prominently. So and the other funny part was, and in political contributions, you typically have to state your occupation on the form. A lot of self-employed truck drivers, transportation, and a lot of self-employed child care providers, which in hindsight, it's like, hey, wait a minute, is this a precursor that looks suspicious? That's even more of a precursor that I didn't even know that was what I was looking at. And so Ohio, I think there's also a certain synergy coming out of Virginia that just outside of, and even though he's not Somali, it's funny, our last two of our last mayoral candidates, Jacob Fry, the winner, and Omar Fatah, are both from the same area of Virginia, almost the same neighborhood. That this is nothing about progressive politics or the Somali community or the increasing socialist movement or other factors are isolated to one place. We just don't know how systemic and endemic it is going out into the rest of the nation.
Well,
I think that Minneapolis is the petri dish sandbox testing area to then disseminate to other electoral geographies.
Right. Well, that's interesting. You bring up the child care, not just in relation to fraud, but child care nationally is one of the lowest paid occupations, right? And the fact that they have spare income supposedly to contribute to out-of-state political candidates is absolutely, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Right. And typically somewhere between 50% and 100% of the maximum allowable contribution for that particular race. And again, not conspiracy, not even claiming malfeasance, because anybody can contribute to a political candidate anywhere within the United States. That's, I know these things because I've had to look at them and be compliant, right? And working in campaigns and as a political organizer. But it's interesting when you start seeing the network develop. And I also think that, notice the thing about childcare and other health-related social services is that it's highly bureaucratic, and it is so easy to have an issue all of a sudden just go underwater in paperwork and never be seen again. And good luck finding it, finding that needle in the haystack, because it's finding a needle in a stack of needles, because it's so easy to disappear into that regulatory haze.
Except for one thing, which is, massive increase in personal wealth for Ilhan Omar since she's taken office. And Scott, forgive me, you can play ref here if I go too far, but isn't there an obvious connection between the Somali fraud and their leader being a member of Congress?
Well, and you're also going to see an unusual outward display of wealth in the Somali community, and the vehicles that are driven. A lot of Beamers, a lot of Mercedes, a lot of you'll hear that quite often, is that For being refugees with nothing, there's sure a large outward display of wealth
Mhm.
in many cases, and this is also now. I mean, when if we're going to look at the Somali community specifically, you have to start breaking things down into age categories. Like the issues that Minneapolis has with Somali youth, very different, right? Is and that I can attribute from what I've seen working in the field as much the Americanization of Somali youth and being bored youth and
Mhm.
just a more violent version of what I was doing in rural Illinois, hot wiring cars and drinking beer out on a lot of that kind of
Mhm.
standard aberrant teen behavior to an extreme where, yeah, you're going to end up going to county jail a couple times if you keep pushing it hard enough. But that's more of a gang problem, more of a just good old fashioned urban street gangs and participation and sense of community and belonging. Then you get into administrative fraud, right? Where we're seeing in health and human services ties to government offices on every municipal and state level. Um, that's an administrative issue, and why does that seem more prevalent? And then I look at uh, conversations and issues that I've had with the elder and leader portion of that population, and I always shake my head as to why are there no checks and balances on these things as they arise. And it's heads. I scratch my head because that's you can't really look at that as anything but a byproduct of being such an insular community and not only is there no melting pot, is that okay, that cast iron's pretty thick as
Mhm.
far as cooking up that melting pot.
Mhm.
Yeah, I should point out that Sean, you've spent years in addiction recovery treatment and helping people overcome addiction. And something that I found very special about you is you're one of the few voices in Minneapolis or Minnesota that was advocating for adopting more conservative thought patterns because they do help you to straighten out your thinking and overcome drug addiction. And I found that a fascinating line of thinking, and I can see you bringing that same kind of logic to this other situation and trying to bring back that sense of calm and center and reason and logic. And I know your wife is the head of the Minneapolis GOP now, and I'm curious, we're all planning for the midterms. Do you see this fraud issue as being brought into the spotlight to help get more conservative votes? Do you think that's something that can actually come of all this?
Most certainly,
Okay.
most certainly. Definitely an issue. The question becomes to what level, to what degree do centrist Democrats hang on to their Stockholm syndrome, or
Mhm.
um, or resistance to have the letter R anywhere within their sphere of association, name, reputation, whatever. It's almost cliquish, like high school or junior high. You can't have that nerd film on you or whatever. It's that level of I can't even call it ego. It's just kind of okay. I can't be seen socially as a Republican. Okay.
Mhm.
Never admit to it. It's
Well, and that sort of issue brings up something else that's sort of fascinating about the demographics. Of course, Minnesota is not a swing state, solidly blue. I mean, a lot of stuff nationally we see is going back since 1984. It's the only country, it's the only state that goes for Mondale against Reagan. Of course, he's a native son, right? So
well,
there is that issue, but I think there's also a sort of real question where you have a state that is still, as far as I understand, still majority white, right? That old 19th century Scandinavian, as
mm-hmm.
you put it,
Yep.
immigrant community.
I'm going to use the
Yeah, but there's also and the power establishment. I mean, this is not a state where outside of Illinois we've really seen huge inroads with minorities getting into the power status. Jacob Fry is white. Tim Walz is white, right? Klobuchar. All these people are this traditional thing, but yet we have this sort of focal point here on this minority community. What do you think that dynamic is? I mean, why do we have if this is really about race,
Yeah.
What's the issue with a white power structure in some sense, um, um, pushing these sorts of narratives about resistance to the government and whatnot?
Say that one more time. I kind of
Well, I
lost
guess
you
what I'm
right
trying
in
to
the middle.
get, yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm trying to get at is you have a sense that a lot of the problems are embedded in this Somali community, but that doesn't work. They don't control the levers of power on their own to cause these problems. Why do we have a white establishment that, in a predominant narrative, that they are resistant to these types of migrant communities? Why are they so strongly supporting a lot of this?
It's that all inclusiveness. It's
Hmm.
DEI on steroids. It is political positioning. It is DNC, National Democrat strategy, identity politics into overdrive. It's been weaponized. It is um, again that whole red green alliance, and the progressive the strong progressive culture of Minnesota that goes back well before World War II
Right,
is that alliance, that identity system. That's why we're also a sanctuary state for an LGBTQ transition issues, right?
right.
And what is that? That's Health and Human Services, and
Hmm.
it's now a human right without parental consent, and that's another aspect. But I think it is the byproduct of it just this is unchecked, hyper wild DEI inclusive race politics, identity politics. There is no way to make a Minnesotan feel guiltier than even hint at calling them a racist from afar,
Right.
right?
Well, and
And
that,
it's a
yeah,
terror.
yeah, and that's, I mean, that's one of the things where we see a lot of these issues, or where actually we haven't seen a lot of these issues, is we have places like, the South traditionally. Some of the responses to this type of stuff in the South, where over the last 60 years since the Civil Rights Movement, we have a far larger minority presence within the political power structures, right? And that seems to be uh, muting some of this stuff, even though that there's so many people that believe that the southern states are still locked in sort of 1960s mentality, but they're looking utterly different. And a lot of this race-based stuff is coming out of northern states that supposedly don't have that mentality, but actually do have far more segregated power systems. That's why I'm interested in this. This is
Oh
an
yeah,
interesting
and it
dimension.
blows my mind because I'm a child of the Deep South. Grew up half of my childhood, half of my life in all over the Deep South,
Hmm.
Louisiana, Georgia, Alabama, Mississippi, Kentucky, Tennessee, and coastal areas where supposedly everybody's slack jawed, drinking corn from a jelly jar, pone munching, whatever. And why is it that now, what is it? Alabama is leading the nation in aerospace development. Is
Right,
Minnesota? No. Look at education standards. Mississippi is handing us our butts,
right.
right? And it goes back to that Garrison Keillor mythos about Minnesota and its progressivism and its self-styled superiority is that while they can hang on to that, actual education standards have fallen to under 35% reading and math proficiencies at the high school level. And that's what also elevates these protests as some sort of ethical, moral, in their mind, important civil rights action, and that kind of cultural fear of missing out that they were never at Selma themselves. The
Hmm.
BBC was asking me yesterday, why doesn't this compare? Well, Martin Luther King wasn't bringing fentanyl into the neighborhood in bulk.
Hmm.
He wasn't fighting that drug trafficking and that death rate
Hmm.
coming into the city, right?
Hmm.
And at some point, politicians in Minnesota have really honed in on that psychological use of the race card, and in combination with guilt, uh,
Hmm.
to advance the program, because it's not benevolent, it's not charitable to do any other.
Oh, yeah. So I'm a business person. I always like to look at things from a market perspective. Politics is a lot of fun for me. There's a huge art to it. But when it comes down to what's actually going to happen, I like to look at things from concrete numbers. And so you have a bunch of fraudsters that ostensibly are going to get their principal employment removed from them. So you're going to have a class of people that are no longer employed or taking on these grants and getting money. So I'm assuming you're going to have a bunch of people that need a lot more help, while at the same time the state's been completely defrauded and ran out of money. How do you see the next 5 or 10 years for Minnesota going after this devastating hit?
Well, pretty grim, actually, because like with the housing fraud, right? There were 77 third-party vendors that were suspected of fraudulent activity. So the entire program was shut down. Because of those 77, that's over 1,500 providers that, and not all of that, not all 1,500 were fraudulent by any stretch of the imagination. They were providing actual services. But now, okay, all of the clients for all of those other 1,500 providers, what are they doing right now?
Mm-hmm.
Where are they living? I don't know. Who does?
Right.
Did did they all not exist? I don't think so. And the ones that did, where did they go? Where is the press coverage of all of these parents who have lost their childcare? That funding has been frozen, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm looking for the ramifications myself, because logically those should be appearing now.
Yeah.
And the most important part of that question is, yes, we've displaced people, but the next part is, can we absorb more people based on this? And meaning we have all this fraud, it's starting to come out in the open. Are people, center Democrats, independents, are they going to be able to be a little bit more receptive to Republicans, do you think, after all of this? Or is this going to be a thing where they double down and see, these guys are terrible. This is why we'll never join them. I really don't know how this is going to go.
And I don't either. I would like to think that it would shine somewhat of a light on, okay, just the extent. Granted, yeah, you can have a big heart, you can have all the intentions in the world, but how long do you tolerate being taken advantage of? And it's my fear is that, okay, it's not so much that they'll double down, but then that's just a portion of the population that just decides not to participate at all,
Mm-hmm.
and just becomes disenfranchised, right? Like you have one of the reasons why we have such a progressive city council is low voter participation, right? And even though the brag is that we have the nation's highest and greatest integrity voter participation, 75-80%, looking at those are for the big races, right? Those are for governor, those are for president, when there's big ticket municipal races. And even then, with your 70-80% turnout, just like anywhere else in the nation, anybody who knows better, that's still leaving out 40% of the eligible adult population that just doesn't care. They don't participate and they don't vote. So add that into the basket. Municipal participation, none of these hyper left candidates and now office holders that are strongly directly DSA affiliated, not just DFL, are coming into office with under 30% of the eligible adult population. Under 20, actually, once you take out non-participation, under 20% of the population, putting these people in office, because being a Republican in Minneapolis over the last 20 years has been an exercise in futility, and why bother. It has been our job over the course of the last 3 years to start inspiring that participation, saying that, okay, this is numerically impossible. DFL office holders are not inevitable if there is a reason to participate, and that's where it becomes a challenge to draw viable candidates out of the specific geographies of in the population of Minneapolis, for state house, for state senate, for school board.
Do you think? Can I ask a follow up to that? Because that actually gets into something that I've been doing some other research on for other projects, but I think it is fascinating. Is that one of the things that seems to happen is we have a federal system, and still, even in states like Nevada, where state has such a control over municipalities and counties, there's still a lot of local stuff that local powers can do. But our political narrative, our political discussion is the only thing that matters is what happens in the state capitol. The only thing that matters is what happens in Washington, D.C. Do you think that just sort of the mentality that we tend to talk about this? Well, even these protests, right? Well, geez, if the Trump administration had not done this in ICE, we wouldn't have any of these problems, right? Or even Omar's initial response to the fraud. Well, if the federal government had just set up guardrails, right, we wouldn't have had this stuff and this total abdication of local responsibility for these issues. Do you think that's playing a role in this?
Certainly, certainly. The it is impossible to understate the level of political, social, political, social, emotional extortion that happens on a daily basis. Being a Republican in the city of
Mm-hmm.
Minneapolis, being someone who is even slightly right of center, someone who is on the right side of the left, right, is that so much else that matters elsewhere. You talk about the importance of state and local, and as it leads into what's important. Do people think it's important? Is it's not necessarily that that's what they think is important. That's what they've heard,
Mm-hmm.
or that's what they're supposed to focus on. That somehow it's Donald Trump's fault that the head of the police federation is doing something, and there's that disconnect and that overarching constant reinforcement socially and culturally that if it's Republican, it's wrong, or that it's there is an ill intention, that it's wrong, that it's a lie, that it's a falsehood, that it's stunning. I've been all over this country. I've never seen anything like Minnesota.
Mm.
That's a stunning statement just from a freedom of speech standpoint. You live in a state where you don't feel like you can speak, and when you do, you're certainly not listened to.
Oh, I have no problem doing it, but many people,
Well,
most people are timid. They don't want to put up the fight.
your rights are not being safeguarded.
Right, right. Well, and it's just not worth the effort to constantly be fighting. And it's like the movie Fight Club. Most people will go out of the way to avoid a fight,
Yeah.
yeah, even when it's instigated.
Unless you're a Northern Nevadan.
Yeah. We're out here. I have a question about media that I find sort of interesting. Is that so? You just sat for some BBC interviews, BBC4, BBC Overseas Service here recently. But the funniest thing is, in my mind, is that video that just came out over the last couple of days of Alex Petty kicking the taillight out of the SUV. That comes out of a BBC documentary. Why are we seeing foreign news services doing far more investigative and sharing information out of these events than we see the American news services? Do you have a thought on that? Well, I mean, it's a very interesting issue.
Do I need to state I'll sound like a broken record with every other conservative in the nation. Is that our media is wildly politically corrupted or tilted to the left?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm watching our local NBC affiliate, right, and they have a little montage, right, of protesters, and what's one word that comes to mind when and justice and freedom and just human rights and Holocaust and whatever. And one of the people featured is possibly one of the fruitiest, nuttiest city council candidates for Ward 13, who was one of the guys who shut down Lyndale Avenue with the Free Palestine protests last summer, shut down the Lowry Hill Tunnel, which is I-94 going through downtown. We have another city councilman that lost an eye in the protests to a beanbag. The media promotes these people, holds them up as champion in large ways, in small ways. I mean, that's just a 3-second flash, but that's the local NBC station, the local CBS station, or ABC. Same story. They bend over backwards to use the language of the prevailing narrative of the DFL, of the Democrat Party nationally, of the sympathetic narrative. Oh, damn it, aren't we just such nice people all the time? Kind of, and to be otherwise is just to be mean, you Republicans.
Yeah.
I had a question actually from a good friend of mine. His name is Garth. He's in Northern Nevada. He wanted me to ask you a question. He wanted to know if there's been any investigation into how much of these protesters are paid and how much are just natural occurring protests. Do you have an idea?
I do. And it's a 3-part answer.
Okay.
Yes. And part of it is that if you're talking, yes, people are getting paid to knock doors and do just the usual political activity, and the Democrats have way more money for it, and they pay their canvassers and door knockers $15 to $20 an hour, standard operating procedure. Our people do it. 501c3s do it all over the place. Yeah, that's part of education. Doing surveys, doing polls, hanging lit, all that kind of stuff. There's that. right? Then you have the funding structure of, okay, well, people will say, oh, this is indivisible, this is George Soros, this is so and so paying these protesters. What they're doing is the independent expenditures. They're paying the printing costs for the posters that show up. Oh my Lord, within 90 minutes of something happening, full color. My wife works in printing. These are not cheap. And wow, there's a template waiting, right?
We've all noticed.
They're paying for that. Are they paying activists to fly in? They're probably paying airfare. You know, I'd like to see the flight logs for Sun Country Airlines for last Friday when we had 50,000 downtown. A lot of it's organic because yes, people will come in on their own up 94 from Chicago, from Milwaukee, from Madison, from Eau Claire, because this is the activist class. They got the phone call. They're in for it. This is their Woodstock. This is their Lollapalooza for the weekend, right? And that may be coarse, but I don't care. That's the level of performative activism that's going on with these people. Are they getting paid? Well, yes, they are campaign staffers. They are employees. You saw it with the church protests, right? Is that one of the people arrested, St. Paul Public School board member, another person who is somehow related in there, the spouse of the county attorney, someone who works in the county attorney's office. Is that this is payroll. This is, okay, whistles, the paraphernalia, whistles, these little pamphlets that they hand out, Monarcha, SEIU, the unions, whatnot. Yeah, there's union money coming in. There's nonprofit organization money coming in. And these are the networks that, okay, yeah, you can make $15 an hour as a door knocker. Yeah. Do we need warm bodies at this protest? Yes, I am certain that people are being flown in and compensated for their time. Some of it legal, most of it 1099 status. And that, I mean, I think it's shocking to the general public, the general population, but that if you've been in politics for any amount of time, that you know that this is just how this works. And okay, I know I have to give a receipt to this person for this activity kind of thing. Some of it's just standard procedure that a lot of people don't realize happens. And is it dark money? Yeah, everybody uses dark money. It's just how you file it. The dark money is coming from filing as a 501c3 for tax purposes. That's how the dark money is coming in. It's the nonprofit industrial complex. And then when you start, the fraud is paying for this in some ways, right? Because that's your, I call it misery industrial complex. They're the harm reduction programs, that whole milieu of human services. These are the same volunteers in the same organizations. This is their mailing lists. This is their donor list. This is nothing but data management organization on a greater scale than just your coffee house revolutionaries. It's a well-oiled machine.
Well, that machine thing gets to it because, of course, the emerging story that's coming out here over the last few days, the term that started being used, and I think you used it yourself yesterday, was Signalgate, right? Where now it seems that we're getting a lot through this Signal app. And, viewers might remember that was Pete Hegseth got into a lot of trouble with that early in his term as Secretary of War. But we have that, the Signalgate, where now it appears they've got active communications from people within government positions sort of working with these protesters directly. Is there anything new on that? I mean, that's going to be something that's going to probably take a while to get to the root of, but are you hearing anything on the ground?
It's not surprising, and it's out in the open. Like let me tell you about Nextdoor. You're not supposed to do political stuff on Nextdoor, but holy cow, there's all sorts of little organized operations, chasing ice, spotting. I think I got caught up in a little bit of that yesterday, but my car stereo was a little too loud. I don't know. I think I was on the periphery of that James O'Keefe thing. Either that or they were honking at me for being a Republican. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you have James running around right now?
It's anything about Signalgate that's going to come out is not surprising to anyone here on the ground who's worked on a campaign for city council, or it's the same network. It's the same network of consultants that have been holding hearings on the future of the third precinct right?
Mhm.
Community meeting after community meeting after community meeting until they get the answers that they want. Oh yeah, that's a data hoovering operation right there. They're
Right.
just geofencing, deciding, seeing who shows up and start political marketing there. Your neighborhood associations, right? That's a trickle down. That's another scandal that you can look up fairly easily with the violence preventer programs, right? Defund the police, but let's give all sorts of funding to the violence interrupters, right? But oh, there was no accountability. Poof, at
Mhm.
$30 an hour times X number of heads, right? Oh, those are expenditures by the same city council people that are now leading the protests. It's just this big
Mhm.
laboratory of fun. That yeah, none of this is shocking to anyone. And if you want a heads up on how all of it works, yeah, just give me a call. It's not hard to figure out. It's a matter of looking at campaign finance reports and whatever the end of year expenditure reports for nonprofit organizations that
Mhm.
are dominant in one Senate district, two House districts, and about three city council wards in South Minneapolis,
Mhm.
and their affiliated nonprofit associations and neighborhood associations.
So, Shawn, we want to be respectful of your time here, but I'm sort of curious: is the Minneapolis GOP actually? I mean, understandably, you're in the midst of a massive reorganization for a couple
Mhm.
different reasons. But are you guys doing like publishing a blog that's looking at all this stuff, or is that any type of public outreach that somebody from out here, say in Nevada or elsewhere, can actually reach out to and get more information on?
Well, we have a biweekly newsletter, which is more just general information about when our volunteer nights are, when we're getting together, when our usual monthly meetings are, whatnot. It is all a volunteer operation, and if anyone wants to volunteer to do investigative journalism for me, that would be fantastic. But there's
Right.
people expect to get paid, and well, we're not paying.
Don't have the money.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, exactly. We have security and postage and all sorts of other fun things and rent to
Hmm.
spend our money on. We're working towards that. Um, Trying to build relationships with people who know how to work a pen or a keyboard. I've been doing some media production myself, but once again, it's all a volunteer thing as as we can cobble this together. And yeah, I would love to be sending people with their smartphones into these chaotic crowds. No, not really, because who actually in their right mind wants to go into that mayhem unless there's some sort of incentivization there, you know? I wish we had a strong conservative media. That's if you look at the print media landscape, that's another problem. It's kind of dried up from the perspective of neighborhood newspapers, and all of local media more predominantly is now structured as a 501(c)(3) nonprofit organization.
Organization. Right.
Right. So
Right. And there's.
there's no public notice advertising. There's no
Mhm.
they are beholden to their donor base, which is more often than not very progressive or centrist
Mhm.
progressive. Or, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So.
Local talent who would like to write from a Republican perspective, please do reach out. I would love to have a media presence of some sort.
Right. Well, Crystal, you have any final questions or comments or?
Well, I'm always in awe of California Republicans that really, really try to turn their state around. It seems like an impossible task, but now that Minneapolis has come to light and I've got a chance to meet you, I really applaud you and your wife's effort to try to help Minneapolis out, at least become a little bit more centered. That would be the best thing for everybody in that state. But I guess if there's one thing I want to leave it with, I wanted to thank you for your work, and I pray for your safety and your health for both you and your wife, that you guys get through this midterms safely. And I'm kind of sad that that's something that needs to be said, but I absolutely admire you both. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. It's been very much a pleasure being here. You know,
Yeah.
this is a hoot, and the more I can get the word out there that it's difficult being a Republican in Minneapolis, but it's not impossible, and it's called the silent majority for a reason. And we are working in any way we can figure out and know how to try to get some voice out of the silence and give a sense that it's okay. You know, there's power in numbers instead of individual voices hiding in bunkers in the city of Minneapolis, right?
We'll let you go then. So we've been here with Shawn Holster, Chair Emeritus of the Minneapolis GOP. So thank you again for joining us. I'm Scott Gavorski.
And I'm Crystal Newton.
And we'll see you around the 775.